Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you for hanging out with us today. I know we all have a million things on our plates, demo calls, discovery calls, one-on-ones, all the things, but it's always good to take a step back and sharpen the saw. So glad you decided to hang out with us because we have a really cool topic and it's very topical as we're thrust into the summer months and there's a lot going on. The patios are calling, people are on vacation. It can be difficult to really focus and hit your numbers, whether you're creating opportunities or closing business or leading, high performing teams. So that's the topic we're going to be diving into today. And it's 9 tips for hyper prioritized prospecting to avoid that dreaded summer sales slump. I know personally, I've been there. It can feel like you're fighting this, like you've got wind coming at you, and it's hard. But there are ways and methods to get around it. And I've got an amazing guest who's going to help me kind of run through these tips. But before I introduce my guest here, a few housekeeping items. As you know, if you've ever joined us on a Sales Hacker webinar, we do record all of these. So if for whatever reason you have to jump off, don't worry. We'll send this out to you typically within about 24 hours or so. I know I will get emails being like, hey, where's the recording? Where's the recording? Don't worry, it's coming. And then second, again, we do these webinars for the community, right? These are for you as members of the Sales Hacker community to learn. So we want to discuss things that are relevant to you right now. So if you have questions based on what we're discussing and what we're talking about, please do jump on the Q&A. You can see it at the bottom there, even if you want to now, and say what's up, introduce yourself, name, company, title. Maybe I'll shout some people out. But we love relevant questions. We want you guiding the discussion more than just me. But glad we got that out of the way. I wanted to introduce my guest. I am joined by Chris Garza. Chris, welcome to the community, man.
Thanks. I'm really excited to have some conversations today.
I'm pumped, man. Really looking forward to this one. And a little bit more color on Chris. So Chris is the VP of Sales for the Sales and Marketing Solutions at Dun Bradstreet, where you've actually spent 11 years, which is really impressive and kind of risen from an individual contributor to manager to now exec. So it's been quite the journey. And we were talking before and just on these slides, some impressive things you've been able to pull off. You increased inside sales year over year, new business production by 64% across 4 teams, which is crazy. Drove a 50. I bet. Drove a 15-point trajectory change within 12 months on a historically underperforming field sales team. Do you want to break that down, Chris? What does that actually mean?
Yeah. It means a lot of hard work, honestly, and it means having a really great team. Is really what it means. It's a fun process, and in my career, I've found that sales reps want to do well, right? Who doesn't want to make money? I mean, it's the aspiration, and a lot of times it's they need some help. And I look at my role and my responsibility as a sales leader to make sure that I'm setting up my sales team for success, and that's really what it's all about.
Totally. Yeah, it must have been quite the journey. I look at the growth that I've seen at Dun Bradstreet over the last few years, and you've been there for quite a while. It must be, just looking back, you've seen a lot of changes. You've seen the company really just grow up.
I have. It's been a roller coaster ride, and it's been an awesome journey, to be candid. And when I think about where we are right now as an organization, I couldn't be more excited. The speed of innovation is increasing. The speed at which we make decisions as an organization is increasing, and ultimately, our customers are going to benefit, and that's what it's all about. So again, it couldn't be a more exciting time right now to be a part of the Dun Bradstreet team and organization.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And quickly go into our community, because we had a few people jump on and introduce themselves. So shout out to Joe Lacha. Joe Lacha is the lead development manager at Intelligence North America. Shout out Joe. And then we've got a hometown boy, for me anyway, from Vancouver, Brandon Pasqualto, who says, thanks for putting this on, Scott and Chris. Brandon is a newish SDR at Thought Exchange, beaming in from East Vancouver. Shout out Vancouver in Canada.
Awesome.
All right.
Brandon.
I love it. Cool, man. Well, Chris, I'm gonna let you take the reins here. Let's dive right into it. I know we got some meaty content for everyone, so let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. All right. So summer slump, right? That's kind of what we're here to talk about. You look at this picture, it's like we've all been there. It's the first half of the year has gone well. Your team is finding and closing opportunities. Summer's here, right? Everyone's spirits are up. Vacation starts. As sellers, we've all experienced this type of scenario. Then you feel like the kid whose ice cream just fell on the floor, right? Maybe corny analogy, but at the end of the day, prospects are going on vacation and pipeline build is really starting to slow down. Ultimately, in my experience, this means a longer sales cycle and more difficulty when trying to close. As sellers, we've all experienced trying to close a deal, only to have a key approver or someone from procurement take an unexpected vacation. Those are not fun times. As a seller, I know those are not fun times as a sales leader, trying to explain that one up the chain as well. Given some of these added challenges, summer's a time of the year when being hyper-focused on spending time on the right opportunities is even more top of mind for us sales leaders. While these 9 tips I'm about to share are not going to help you solve for a key approver already on vacation, it's not really a silver bullet for that, they will give you some quick actions that your team can start taking right now to keep momentum moving, right? In my experience, by the way, the best way, for those sellers who are listening to deal with a deal that is stuck right now due to a key approver going on vacation, is don't put yourself in that situation to begin with. And I know, it seems obvious in the outset, but in my experience, the best strategy you can use to counteract this, to prevent it before it happens, is make sure you have a thorough understanding of the customer's buying process. My teams usually ask questions such as, once I send over the agreement for review, what happens next? This really starts the conversation and allows you to probe on process and timeline for everything from legal to procurement to budget approval, purchase order requirements, how many approvers are part of the process, who they are, and yeah, you got it, potential vacation, right? So I always recommend ending that meeting and every conversation you have by closing for the next conversation, even down to a specific day and time with mutually agreed upon goals and a calendar invite. It's a great strategy to prevent what many in sales call ghosting. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. Or when your contact seems to go dark or quiet on you, of course. But let's get back to the 9 tips. That wasn't one of them. So let's talk about how can your team better prioritize and engage the right prospects, right? That's really what this is about. And when we think about the approach, we've grouped our 9 tips into 3 different topics. The first topic is who to target, right? Both from a company perspective and people, because it's important you go after the right type of organization, but it's also really important and equally important that you focus on the right type of persona, right? That can fit the type of product or solution that you're selling. Second group is when is the best time to contact them? And again, that needs to be based on their need and their readiness to purchase. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means and some tips that might be relevant for that area. And the last area that we'll talk about is how to craft your message around what's most meaningful to that specific prospect or buyer, right? So again, how can you draw a connection from something that's important to them to the product solution offer you're trying to make? So I think the theme that you'll probably see throughout is you got to double down on using a data-driven approach to find the best and most immediate opportunities so you can then focus on enough time to craft a custom, relevant, and more compelling pitch that's going to increase your hit rate. So let's talk about the first tip. So the first thing is it's really imperative to be data-driven in deciding who to target, right? When you think about an ideal customer profile and propensity to buy, a seller should always focus their time on prospects that most closely match your organization's ideal customer profile. But this is especially true during the summer. While this might not be a major surprise, I am really surprised about how many times I've seen companies make assumptions on their ideal customer profile instead of relying on validated data. Assumptions on something this critical can be really, really costly, and I've seen it happen. On the other end of the spectrum, I've also seen, and I'm seeing maybe even a little bit of a surge in huge investments in data science that's really focused on uncovering key predictive attributes to take the concept of an ideal customer profile really to the next level. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. For organizations that aren't that sophisticated quite yet, you might get there. At the end of the day, our job, and I mentioned this a little while ago, I really look at my job as a sales leader is to set sellers up for success, right? And a data-driven approach is really a foundation to helping me do that effectively. So when I think about this is also proven, right? Organizations such as Forrester have done studies that say leaders using data see better outcomes, right? In a recent Forrester survey, you can see data activation leaders report increases for sales, marketing, and customer metrics. You can see 73% report faster sales cycle, 73% report higher return on marketing spend, and 77% report increases in customer loyalty and retention, right? So again, I'm a very data-driven individual, and that's due to both my personality, my experience, and candidly, the organization I work for, right? We're all about making sure that the data tells the story. And when I see something such as this slide, again, it's backed by data. It's compelling to me.
Yeah.
So
Chris,
how can we take this data?
In there.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, jumping in there quick. So, you've got this data-driven, data-forward approach. Let's say I'm working at a startup, or maybe we're going into a new market or a new industry. When there is a lack of data, who should I get in the room to help define my ICP? Like, if you don't have a ton of data, what should you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, it's especially as a startup, right? As a startup organization, you're scrappy. You may not have, you probably don't have, let's be real. You don't have a marketing analytics team, right, doing analytics for you. You probably have someone who's responsible for sales, probably going out and finding new customers as well as managing them, candidly, right? People are going to wear multiple hats. My recommendation, when you think about it, the resources that are available inside of a startup would be, number one, marketing. Right? You're typically going to have somebody who's responsible for marketing. They're the ones crafting the message out to the market. But you also have to have sales, right? So when I think about some of the types of responsibilities that are available and resources that are available in that type of environment, I think marketing and sales is a great start. Now, again, as you scale your organization, you're going to want to include more types of personas and more responsibilities, someone potentially in marketing operations, somebody in analytics, if you have a data science team. But you don't need a ton of data, right? So when I think about this, if you're planning your go-to-market, right, what data is out there that you can base your go-to-market approach on? If you have a couple of customers that are closed, right, even if it's a handful of customers, what can you learn about those specific customers? Again, if you have 500 customers, sorry about the lighting here, but if you have 500 customers and you scaled up, right, you have a larger sample size to draw from. But at the end of the day, everyone started with their first customer, their first 5, their first 10, right? Being able to go through and understand what does the data say specifically about the industry that they operate in, the size of the organization, geographically, where are they located? Are they a multinational, right? Some of these are different data points that you can look at, right, on individual organizations to try to start looking at some commonalities.
Makes total sense. And are you on a light timer over there? Is that why it's going on?
We're doing like strobing in here, so love it. We have a little motion sensor that is not liking the lack of motion right now. But
you just got to talk with your hands more like I do, and then you're
I know. We'll start waving them up here a little more. How about that?
Awesome. And quickly shout out Brandon Hunter, who's joining us, who's the VP of Sales at GoTech Software. Shout out, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for joining. So let's talk a little bit about ideal customer profile, and we started to get into that a little bit, right? But what is it? What's the approach? Again, I talked a little bit about companies who are making assumptions, right? They're not taking a data-driven approach, and what you're looking at the screen is an example, right? So when we think about this, what we're looking at, Acme Company, for example, they thought their ideal customer profile was, let's say, greater than 200 million in revenue. They're calling out high tech and biomedical segments. They're looking at organizations that are relocating or opening new offices. They're looking at corporate initiatives around environment, right? Because that's their sweet spot based off of what they do. And 150 employees, right? So great start, right? I think this is a fantastic start, and some of these attributes are great things to consider. You got some things like firmographics, and when I talk about firmographics, more employee count, revenue. Some of these things are quantifiable, not all. We want to make sure that we're able to take a consistent approach to industries. High tech and biomedical might not be entirely consistent, but we can talk about once we go through a data-driven approach, what the actual ideal customer profile might look like. So now we're seeing a couple changes, right? I think the first thing you'll notice, and we've got a couple things highlighted, the first thing you'll notice is that actually the ideal customer profile was greater than 100 million, not 200 million. So they were losing lots of high value prospects by setting the bar too high there, right? The second thing you'll notice, and looking at the way that high tech and biomedical was described, we've now come up with an SIC code. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with SIC codes, it's a hierarchy that allows very consistent segmentation of industries. So it's a numerical classification, and that numerical classification in this case would have mapped back to something like 7372, which is prepackaged software. Right, so having that type of data allows you to go out and find more companies that are in that space versus, what's considered a high-tech company, right? That can sometimes get a little gray.
Yeah. So that just lets me
they nailed it on the real.
Sorry to cut you off. So that's just going to allow me the SIC code to dive deeper into an industry and be more specific. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish here is we want to get to something that's quantifiable and consistent, right? So, if I use a tool to go out and find additional leads, such as D&B Hoovers, you want to be able to use something that's quantifiable, right? And while you can talk about high tech and biomedical, industries don't always break down and qualitatively always the way that you want them, but there are some accepted structures such as SIC codes and NAICS codes that allow you to take a more consistent approach to industries.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you can continue to look here. They nailed it on a couple of other pieces, but two other areas that we uncovered. Number one, they weren't thinking about growing. The company's growing, right? How would you have uncovered the fact that out of the, call it 150 customers that you have as a scaling organization, the data shows that all of those are growing organizations without taking, again, a data-driven approach. It's very difficult to look at a list of organizations and know with certainty that all of those are growing or that 80% of those are growing, right? And that there's potentially something there that can help you find a higher value segmented white space. Right. And then the last thing is again, getting some type of geographical fencing. So an understanding of where the organization is located can be incredibly important.
Awesome. And quick question here, and I think I know the answer, but Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So Prabjot has a question. Prabjot, thanks for the question. What would be the equivalent of SIC in Canada? Which I think it's still SIC. I think we have the same coding structure. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, standard industrial classification, SIC code, we do absolutely classify companies in Canada with that same consistent approach. So that is absolutely accepted and something, again, that once you understand that ideal customer profile in those industries, we'd be able to help you out and go find some white space with that consistent approach using
That's
SICs.
Awesome. And is that global, or is that North America?
NAICS code stands for North American Industrial Classification System. SICs can absolutely be considered global. Yes.
Cool. Thank you. Great question, Prabcha.
Yeah. Continue. Next slide. The next tip. Spot shorter sales cycle sales opportunities and cross-sell opportunities in corporate family trees where you have an existing relationship. So let's talk about what that means. Some of you may have known this, but Zappos is owned by Amazon, right? What can that potentially mean to you as a seller? Well, that one might have been a little bit more obvious, right? Microsoft, LinkedIn, but let's play this out, right? Acme Corporation, which is the company that we just talked about. Right, we talked about their ideal profile. They may have had a relationship with a company called Alien Vault, which met their ideal customer profile criteria. They sell cybersecurity software, which falls within that SIC code, 7372. They're located in California, and they also happen to be growing as a company. Well, it turns out AT&T recently acquired Alien Vault, and now Acme can leverage this relationship to get into AT&T. Right, so when we think about speeding up a sales cycle in the summer, if your pipeline's short and you're looking for an area that could lead to faster sales cycle deals, this is a great place to look. My teams have used this strategy to find and close large deals. Right, doesn't only apply to the summer, but it's a great strategy because in my experience, my experience shows me that these deals typically do have a sales cycle that's much shorter, given that you can sometimes leverage the vendor onboarding process you went through with the existing relationship you have, right? So to me, what that means is I potentially don't have to deal with infosec. I can, pre-build out what the legal language might look like. And on top of that, I'm a proven provider versus a new provider coming in the door. So there's less of a question as to whether I can truly deliver on my value proposition.
I love that.
What do you think about that one, Scott?
That's awesome. So to make that super actionable for those listening, would a good exercise be, take a look, like quickly go through, take an hour today, go through each and every, customer that you've signed in the last, 3 years and see if you can spot either like a parent company or a recent acquisition, something along those lines, and be like, okay, here's the ones I'm reaching out to and I'm going to reference that. And is that a good exercise?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, to make this real, I mean, my team closed the deal last month that was far above our average sales price in about 50% of the time using this strategy.
Wow. Amazing. Oh, it's an awesome tip.
Yeah, great results. So let's keep moving. The next tip here is reverse engineer deals to understand the complex nature of purchasing personas. One of the things that my teams do after a win is the team member who closed the deal breaks the deal down for the team. This means how the opportunity was found, the business problem that we were helping to solve, and the different stakeholders that we engaged to help close the deal. Understanding each persona's role in the buying process is absolutely critical to help you find shortcuts to close future deals faster. I would highly recommend this process for all the sales leaders out there if you're not already doing something similar. The learning that we have and what I've found is that the majority of times you need to cast a wider net than just a single contact that you may have come across on a marketing qualified lead. From the buyer's perspective, B2B purchase decisions can be incredibly complex. And I know I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know in terms of the complexity, but the stats show that could involve up to 5 or more decision makers. And this especially applies as you start to target larger accounts. So you want to be sure that you're connecting with as many stakeholders as possible with a tailored message specific to the persona with whom you're speaking. And again, using the same message for a VP of marketing is not going to resonate with a VP of sales. Take the extra few minutes it will take to customize the value proposition in your outreach to give yourself the best opportunity for a response. Okay, so let's talk about when to contact. What's the best time to reach out? So, programmatic digital marketing, marketing automation, the rise of customer data platforms such as Lattice engines have drastically advanced how we track buyers through their journey to initiate sales interactions at the opportune time. But in many organizations, it's still the sales leader's responsibility to prioritize the team's outreach. And again, and I know I keep saying it, but I truly believe it's our job as sales leaders to set our teams up for success. Finding events at your target account is key, but can be manual and time consuming. After an event, it's important to get in the door quickly. So you got to know your buying signals and how your team will spot them efficiently. Examples of buying signals are events or activities such as a new product launch or office openings or even closings for that matter, new management or a merger acquisition. Once the event that signals a need for your offer happens, it's important to get in the door quickly. Even better, if you can be alerted of news that indicates something might happen or is about to happen, you also have a better chance of beating your competition to the punch by connecting with that company and starting to add value. The second thing I can say about buying signals, intent data, right? It's really starting to become more widely used and more widely offered. One form of intent data establishes a baseline level of activity among companies searching for keywords that are relevant to your products and services, and then highlights an increase in that baseline. The concept is that a surge or increase in activity could mean the company is in market to make a purchase, right? So having access to some of that data, again, can really help with the timeliness of your outreach. Tools are available to help you find companies undergoing a specific type of event that makes a company a better fit for what you sell. Once this type of event is called out, modern techniques are used to scan web and news sources to present you with relevant triggers. So these triggers can be the difference in helping you catch the right prospect at the right time. And again, tools like D&B Hoovers really help you break down what some of these signals or triggers could look like to help make sure that you are notified as soon as they happen, if not giving you a little bit of insight when something is starting to happen. While a view on ideal customer profile, match and propensity to buy that we mentioned earlier give insight into who is more likely to buy, signal data shines a light on who is likely to purchase now, right? So taking advantage of signal data and intent data is really a powerful way to focus your selling efforts on those prospects with a compelling event that will drive purchase or those already showing intent to purchase. Signal data is often most useful when set up in a tool ahead of time, against seller key accounts. So for example, the way we handle this in D&B Hoovers is as a seller, you have the ability to preload some of your existing accounts or prospects, and that way these signals, once you have them set up, get pushed to you. Or, of course, the best practice is you can also integrate it into key CRMs, such as Salesforce.com. So our next tip number 5, think of unconventional places to find immediate needs. So this is a fun one. Looking in these places positions your prospects. One of the best places actually to go look for, unconventional signal data or even something to give you a heads up, job postings. Right. So when you think about job postings actually have, a myriad of data, right? And that myriad of data can be incredibly helpful. So, I could even think about an example of a seller that I knew, right? This seller was responsible for selling outsourced development resources. He actually would go to job posts to find organizations looking to hire developers, and then he would actually go in and target those specific organizations, right? Along with casting a broad net to find companies hiring for that specific role, it's also really helpful to look at job postings to understand what markets an organization is hiring in, how many jobs they've posted, right? Because, again, when we think about signals of growth, if an organization has, more jobs versus less that are posted that they're hiring for, that tells you they're scaling up. Right? You can even look at job descriptions for roles that your seller could potentially interact with during a sales cycle. I've learned a ton. My teams have learned a ton that have helped us close deals by looking at places such as job postings. I mean, some of the things that we've taken away from this tip, understanding current projects and initiatives that are important to the organization, how a department or a persona is measured, again, even down to specific KPIs that are tracked, right? the knowledge of those specific KPIs, especially if your product and solution can influence and improve those numbers, critically important, right? And it really sets up your value proposition to resonate. Other things that we've learned are even how an organization is structured, and things that are important to us, how many sellers are available, or how many sellers exist within an organization, and the hierarchy of those sellers. Again, field, inside. So there's really some great information you can find in job postings. One other place that I'll talk about is earning call transcripts. So for public companies, this is actually an awesome place to look. The more that you can tie your pitch and value prop to the C-level and board level initiatives, the more you can expect your message to resonate. So, for earnings call transcripts, personally, I usually use Seeking Alpha. I think it's a great tool. You have the ability to load in your specific accounts that you're interested, or companies that you're interested in, and you will get pushed this type of information as they're released. I can't tell you how many times I've used earning call transcripts to frame how the team is going to position something that we feel strongly can help an organization, right? And again, just to reinforce, unless you're already talking to the C-level, this is one of the greatest ways to understand what's important to C-level and to the board. Tip number 6. Regardless of your organization's level of technological sophistication, serving up real-time sales intelligence alerts and the tools that your team already use is hard to beat. So I know we already talked a little bit about buying signals in tip number 4, but the point of workflow integration can't be emphasized enough. Really having all the intelligence in the world means nothing unless you have the ability to drive adoption. I've had some organizations tell me that they've struggled to drive adoption in things like CRM, right? And when I hear that, what better way to get sellers to use CRM than to actually put data that they value and that they can use as a part of their sales process directly in the CRM itself, right? So taking the CRM from a tool that let's be real. I know all you sellers are thinking it's a forecasting tool, right? It's kind of a pain to use. It's just my sales leaders looking at my activity in CRM. The more us as sales leaders put more relevant information in CRM, the better adoption we're going to be able to drive with our sellers. All right. Let's talk about what's most meaningful to your prospect. At the end of the day, this is really centered around personalization and custom pitches being the norm now in terms of sales outreach in most industries, and it takes time. Aim to shorten that time by surfacing the info that you need and that your reps need to be able to sell effectively. According to Forrester, 74% of deals are awarded to the seller who is first to provide value and insight. And again, a data-driven approach. This is real. We have to be relevant. And again, I know I'm not telling anybody on this call anything you don't already know in terms of relevancy, but let's talk about some specific examples, right? And how you can be more relevant. The first tip, when targeting public companies, 10K reports are underrated. They're absolutely underrated. So for those of you asking, what are these? Well, the good news is they're required by the SEC. 10Ks are annual reports. So you typically have an organization that puts this together. I mean, these things they're big. They're 100+ pages. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I can't comb through 100 pages to try to get the insight I need. Agreed. Definitely not recommending that. I don't want to waste your time, right? But in terms of where to find the most value, or at least what my experience shows has been the most valuable for my teams, there's really 2 sections. I'm not paying attention to the income statement and the cash flow statement. I mean, maybe I might look at it to get a feel for health of the organization, but what I'm more interested in is the qualitative stuff. And again, going back to what I talked about on the earnings call, the things that are going to be really important to the C-level and to the board, because those are the things that are going to get funded. So 2 sections that I would call out. And when you look at a 10K, they're typically presented and structured in a very consistent format. The first section that I would recommend is part 1, and it'll literally say part 1. It's the business section. It's called business. Things that I've learned by looking at 10Ks, company strategy. How many customers do they have? What markets are they in? Oh, and by the way, what markets are they going into? What key initiatives do they have that they're looking to solve for in the next 12 months? Do they want to go through a digital transformation? What do they see as their biggest, or who do they see as their biggest competition? What are some strategic alliances that are currently in play? And do they plan on expanding their alliances effort, right, through channel sales? There's a ton of information in this section, and I would highly recommend that you look at this section. The second section that I would encourage you to consider is Part 1A. Part 1A is called Risk Factors. And what you'll find here typically is anything going on from an economic perspective. So thinking about the macroeconomic scenario that's going on in the situation and how it potentially impacts this specific organization. You'll also learn things like, are there any threats from a regulatory perspective that the company sees could materially impact adversely their financials? You'll see supply and demand considerations. Again, the amount of information you can find here is really incredible. It's awesome. So for those sellers who are focused on publicly traded companies who have not looked at 10Ks, I would highly recommend you jump in and take a look at the 10K report for some of your key customers. Take a look specifically at Part 1 and Part 1A. And I can even give you one more tip in terms of trying to get through this. Again, I mentioned it's 100 plus pages. The business and risk factors section definitely shrinks that down substantially. But, one other strategy, this is really tactical, but, I'll share anyway. When you have it open on a browser, push Control F if you have, Windows-based machine. And, for Macs or for Apples, I'm not incredibly familiar, but whatever the find function is, use the find function and type in a keyword, right, that's important to you or that could be important to what you're trying to sell and the business problem that you could potentially help this target customer or prospect solve. And that will quickly help you scour the document for anything that you consider to be potentially relevant.
That's awesome. Super actionable. And Chris, we got a lot of great questions based on that. I think that tip kind of blew a lot of people's minds, so that's good. But a few things. So one, we've got a question from Sarah. Where can I find these 10K reports? Where are these living?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was Sarah, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, that's a great question. So the 10K reports can be found within D&B Hoovers. So D&B Hoovers, again, is a tool that we have that really helps sellers with a lot of these strategies and uncovering the insights. Very easily accessible within D&B Hoovers, simply with a quick search. Again, these documents are fantastic. Highly recommend you taking a peek.
Nice. And then one more question on the same topic, and this is from Michael. Michael has two really good questions, but we'll get to one for now and the other one in the Q&A section at the end. This is very tactical, and Michael wants to know, okay, so we've got this information, we've got this value nugget that we uncovered in the 10K. How do you translate a piece of information that you picked out of a 10K into a compelling outbound message?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple tips, right? The first thing that I would say is, depending on if you're outbounding or if you're sending an email, I think the first thing is you got to find the right person, right? So understanding within these complex organization, the right persona and the right person to send the message is going to be key. But a lot of it's connecting the value proposition that you offer to what you find in the 10K. So I'll give you a specific example. Facebook. Right? Everybody knows Facebook has been growing like gangbusters. They're doing phenomenally. But, I don't know, maybe it was about a year ago, maybe a little longer. Suddenly the conversation shifted, right? And the conversation shifted materially, not necessarily focused on their growth, but it started focusing on privacy implications and compliance and, in the context of what's going on with politics and elections. If you were to go through and if you were to look at the 10K, you would see a very material difference. And I think it was actually in their, I don't know if it was their last it was their earnings report last year, if it was when they released their 10K. But I remember their quarterly earnings, or if it was their annual report. But I remember seeing a material shift when Facebook came out and said, you know what? We may not continue growing as fast as we've been growing. You know why? because we really have to get this compliance thing and this privacy thing under control. And the market kind of freaked out. They said, wait a minute, what? You're not going to continue growing with the growth rates that you've had? And if I'm a seller and if I'm a team who's focused on that type of organization, I'm going to shift my talk track around helping them grow their top line. And now I'm going to shift my talk track around how can I potentially connect to some of these more material events that they're focused around compliance. So I might send a note, instead of focusing on how I can help them grow their top line, I may pivot a little bit and say, as Dun Bradstreet, or as an organization, we might want to help them understand the identity of the businesses that they're working with, right? Because again, that helps them better understand who their customers are and plays more to the compliance aspect. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was amazing. It's a phenomenal example.
Great questions.
They're good. We got a lot. We got a lot of good ones. So we'll keep it rolling, and we'll save some till the end. Okay,
cool. So let's talk about the next tip. When upselling and cross-selling, it's great to be able to serve up insights from your own data on the customer, right? So this one can be sometimes difficult. Just being candid, but there are some really good ways that you can leverage this insight. So when I think about it, it's like, do you have any data that you can use to stand up a proof of concept that will make your pitch real versus conceptual? And I will give you an example, right? This is an example, again, that's specific to me, but I hope that you all can identify. One of the ways that D&B helps organizations, and this is, again, specific to my team, we help some organizations understand who is visiting their website, what companies are visiting their website. So it's this concept of de-anonymizing website visitors. And for organizations that currently purchase that capability from us, we help them understand specifically these are the types of organizations coming through. Now, if I can take that data, right, because I see who's coming through, and our customer is relying on us to help them identify those organizations, and maybe I come back to them and I append really interesting insights. So I may take that whole data set, I may run some analysis on it and say, this is really interesting. So what I'm seeing here is that 65% of the traffic you have coming in is coming from these three industries, right? And maybe they knew two of them, but they didn't know the third. So the ability to start that really interesting type of conversation can be really key, not only to help you upsell and cross-sell, but to really help you demonstrate thought leadership within your customer base. And let's talk about the last tool. Excuse me, the last tip here. Ramp efficiency by making prospect research easier and more informative, right? And this is kind of a summary of some of the things that we've talked about already, but there's a stat out there that says it takes an average of about 2 hours, 128 minutes to be specific, for B2B sellers to research each prospect before contacting them. This is according to one of our recent studies. More than a quarter of those surveyed said that they are spending between 3 and 7 hours doing research. I don't want my team spending 3 and 7 hours doing research. That's way too long. I need them selling, right? And I'm sure all the sales leaders that are out there would agree with me, especially in the summer months when vacation is popular. And let's be real, even us sellers are taking some vacation. As a whole, I don't think we take a lot, but now is the time we're going to take it if we do. It's critical that you make the best use of your time with tools to help with the process. And again, ideally, really embedding the important data into a workflow. So if I recap these slides, right, it's really imperative to be data-driven in deciding who to target. We want to be able to spot shorter sales cycle cross-sell opportunities in corporate family trees. We want to make sure that you can reverse engineer deals to understand the complex nature of purchasing personas. You need to know your buying signals and how your team will spot them efficiently. Think of unconventional places to find immediate needs. Regardless of your organization's level of technological sophistication, serving up real-time sales intelligence alerts and the tools your team already uses is really hard to beat. Again, I know this one generated lots of questions, and I'll emphasize it again. When targeting public companies, 10K reports are really underrated. When upselling, serve up insights from your own data on the customer to help drive your outreach. And then number 9, ramp efficiency by making prospect research easier and more intuitive. So look, if you're a sales rep that's struggling for leads, you can hit 1 in the chat, and one of the offers we have is we can talk about potentially setting you up with D&B Hoovers for sales leads and to get a better insight on those 10K reports that generate so many questions. If you're a sales leader and you're really just struggling to define your ICP or your ideal customer profile, enter 2 in chat, and we have an offer that will uncover how predictive analytics can give you a more accurate ideal customer profile with a customer profile assessment. So, at Dun Bradstreet, we look at the overall process and the way that we help organizations really in the context of the buyer's journey, right? So when we look at this, the goal here, and you can see that this is a wheel. It's a wheel because we look at this as a circular process that doesn't stop, right? The faster and more effectively you're able to move your prospects through these stages, the faster you'll be able to grow your revenue. The first stage in awareness, really the goal is to target across channels. The problem that D&B helps you solve here is, how do I consistently target my audiences across channels? When you start moving into the research and consideration area, the goal is to engage and nurture, right? And the problem that D&B can help you solve in this stage is, how do I nurture the right prospects and customers to really drive the right type of demand? As you start moving through the buyer's journey more into consideration and decision, the goal is to empower sales, right? Empower the group that I'm talking to right now with tools. The problem that D&B can help you solve in this stage with tools such as D&B Hoovers, again, it's how do I empower sales to align ideal markets, prospect better, and close more deals faster. As we move into the purchase and advocate area of the wheel, the goal really is to analyze wins and identify lookalikes. Right? The problem that we can help you solve here is, how do I analyze markets to identify the best opportunities for my business? And you'll notice here that the word customers is in the middle, right? And that's not because we want to fall back on the cliche that customers are in the center of everything. Look, they are, right? But again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. We made a really cool announcement here recently as an organization, Dun Bradstreet did, our intention to acquire Lattice Engines, which is a leader in the customer data platform space, according to the June 2019 Forrester Wave report. And the really, really cool thing about what this customer data platform space does, or CDP, is, for a marketer, right? I know I'm talking to sellers, but at the end of the day, it's marketing's job to set you guys up with the best possible leads as well. And if we can get marketing to more quickly identify, segment, and activate, right? Activate meaning send you leads within your workflow, all within one platform, that's a huge win, right? And if I think about a specific example, I mean, in my experience, I've partnered with marketing teams to launch targeted campaigns. I've had scenarios come up where I've worked together with this group to come up with a set of criteria for the campaign. Some were firmographic in nature, like the ones I mentioned earlier, industry size, while others were more focused on first-party data, such as product usage, as the example I gave a little while ago. Marketing would then work with a marketing ops team to run the counts in multiple systems, first in a tool where they could segment based on the firmographic data, and then another count in a back-end usage system. Bottom line is they're having to go to all these different systems to run these different counts. And then I had one last requirement. I actually really want to target customers that are focused or that have Salesforce CRM. Well, based off of that, now it kicks off a whole new 2-week period. I've got to enter a ticket. They've got to go to marketing ops. There's a tech process to go through, and pull accounts and conduct deduplication. The great news, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to have experienced this, right? But the great news is that the concept of a CDP can house all of these disparate pieces of data while integrating into marketing automation platforms and CRMs to not only allow you to segment on the fly, but also to send these high quality leads over to sales very quickly. So, again, it's basically, I'm really excited because it's going to help me avoid the scenario that I've been through countless times, and I couldn't be more excited about that. And again, and I keep saying this, and I will keep saying it, our job as sales leaders is to set our sellers up for success. And there's no better way than having a scalable process to serve up the best possible leads. So, looking at D&B as an organization, we do have 300 plus million business records in our data cloud, consisting of 120 million plus hierarchy members. Like we talked about earlier, Amazon Zappos, right, Microsoft LinkedIn to help you cross-sell. And there are 375 million elements that we update every single day.
I love it. Thank you, Chris, man. That was an awesome presentation. And I just want to quickly reiterate for those listening. So if you're an individual contributor and you want to get some of those 320 million records and start looking at maybe those acquisitions or parent companies that we talked about, you can actually get a free trial of D&B if you type 1 into the Q&A section. And if you are a sales leader, type 2, and you'll actually get an ICP assessment. So make sure that you're pointed and your sales team is pointed at the right targets, and you're not doing all these motions, at the completely wrong target. So do that. But let's get to some questions, because we've got some great ones today. So the first one I want to talk about, and this was specifically right after your tip 2, and it was going after kind of the corporate family trees of an organization. And Powell has the question, how are these actionable in the SMB segment, where maybe there's not as much acquisition activity happening? How do you make that actionable in kind of the smaller SMB segment?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. So, the examples I gave are very large multinational organizations, right? But at the end of the day, this absolutely can be relevant. And, what I mean by that is, look, if you're selling into SMB that's really more mom and pop, maybe not the best fit, right? But you even have organizations, $50 million organizations, right, that have different divisions, right? So if you can't think of it in the context of I'm selling into maybe another company within the corporate family, right, leveraging my existing relationships, I would maybe lift and shift the same strategy to think about how can I sell maybe to different divisions within the existing organization, right? So it's the same concept, and that concept is you've built a relationship as a valued provider, right, of whatever it is that you're providing, and you're helping that business solve a very real business problem. How can you have that conversation and use that experience to lift it and shift it into a new contact, right? So again, works great if you're looking at very massive organizations. Even if you're looking at an organization that maybe has 3 to 4 different companies as a part of their hierarchy of organizations, works great, in 3 to 4, just as great as it works in, 3 to 400 to 1,000.
Yeah, totally. Agree. And the only thing I would add there is, we talked about doing that actionable exercise where you could go through your recent wins and pick out, okay, has there been any acquisitions? I've had a lot of success doing a similar exercise with myself and my teams, and mapping competitors. So I find SMBs, companies, smaller companies, when they're in a growing market, they have their head up. They're looking at their competition a lot more than the enterprise does. Enterprise usually in their lane, they're doing their thing. But SMBs, they really care about what their companies are doing. So a great exercise is go through all your recent wins, map out their 5 competitors, reach out to them with, hey, we've helped company X, who is their competitor, with these 3 challenges. Is it safe to assume that you're going through the same challenges? And typically you'll find
I love it. I couldn't agree more, Scott. And some of the reactions might be, well, I may not be able to go in and say I've helped customer X, right? You can still have the same conversation and say, hey, I've helped leading organizations, in this space, right? And the value proposition will still be very real, right? So don't let that stop you.
Totally. Even using the language that you used with that organization will usually resonate with their competitor because they live in the same world.
I couldn't agree more. And I would take that even a step further, right? I mentioned looking at 10Ks and looking at tools like Hoovers to, really understand what's important. But, you made a great point, Scott. It's yes, what's important to them, but it's also how they talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The specific phrases that they use, those are the same phrases that you want to use. And if, to your point, you're prospecting into an organization that's more SMB focused, then look at competitors that are large and start using those phrases.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, the power of buzzwords and jargon by industry is very important. You could be, trying to solve a problem that they actually have, but you're just using the wrong language, and so they can't identify.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Okay, moving on. Again, this is Michael. Michael's got some good questions here. So how would you leverage an existing prospect relationship with the decision maker in a different business unit?
How would I leverage an existing prospect relationship if they are in a different business unit?
Yeah, so I think Michael is probably selling to a large organization, and he's trying to break into another business unit, and he has a relationship with the decision maker in a different.
That's awesome, Michael. That's a great problem to have, right? Much better than the alternative. So a couple of tips or a couple of things to think about. Number one, how strong is the relationship, right? That's something that you would want to definitely take into consideration. Number two, when you think about that business decision maker, is he or she in an area that is influential based off of what you're trying to sell, but just not in that division, right? Or are they in a completely separate area of the business, right? Those are just a couple of things to think about. Now, I'll make some assumptions, right, and provide a couple of thoughts. So if, you're talking to Division A, and this is your contact and your relationship as a potential buyer, but you're trying to penetrate another area, fantastic. Right? If that relationship is really strong, then leverage that as a sponsorship, right? They know their organization way better than you will, right? Than you ever can. You're on the outside. Understanding from them what their perspective is in terms of who are the right people to talk to, I think is huge. So that's the first thing, right? Because again, we talked about getting to the right person is a big part of the battle as well. The second piece is bounce your thoughts, right, in terms of how you would approach that target person and what the value proposition and what your message is. Leverage that relationship, depending again on the strength, as a sounding board, right, and ask for the introduction. I know sometimes as sellers, I've seen sellers be a little hesitant to ask for the introduction. Go for it. Ask for the introduction. You don't have anything to lose. You have everything to gain. If the relationship is as strong as you believe it is, and if you've added value to his business and his process, I'm sure the answer is going to be yes. But make sure that you swing, right? Don't get up there and not swing.
Yeah, totally. And the only thing I would add to that, and again, this is making an assumption that this one decision maker bought your product or your service, but if they did, I would, make sure you give them enough time, to see the value. Like you don't want to implement a solution and then right away be like, hey, can I have an introduction to this business unit? So give them enough time to see the value. And then once the value is proven there, in my eyes, you go directly at the individual and you're like, hey, you look like a rock star for, implementing this initiative in this unit. Why don't we duplicate that in this unit? And your personal influence is just going to grow, right? I think that's when you go at the individual.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the one thing I'll add to that is, anything quantitative, right? Again, I'm data driven. That's just by nature. But if you have already sold something and that is a current customer of yours and you're trying to cross sell, then what are the measures that they're looking at and the KPIs that they're looking at that says this was successful? Because you want to take those, right? These business executives are going to be very data driven and they're going to want to understand quantifiably what's the value it offers to the business. Right. So if your existing contact is tracking those, that much better.
Totally. And I'm going to sneak, I know we're at 1 minute, but I'm going to sneak one more question in just for my boy Joe here, Joe Lachow, wants to know. So Joe's actually on the marketing side of the house, it sounds like. And this is the age-old problem, I guess, on the marketing side. Yeah. What would you recommend, Chris, when someone on the marketing team is serving up leads to sales that they believe are like in the ICP, but sales is slow to reach out. How would you deal with that situation? Incentives? What's the best way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely, incentives applies, but it's at some point you get diminishing returns if it's just for reaching out to your everyday lead, right? My recommendation. I mean, within, and I mentioned Lattice earlier, kind of a marketer's platform. One of the really cool things that CDPs can do, right, is allow you to quickly segment on the fly and activate. And part of the activation is actually sharing with the sales team, here are the reasons that I'm actually saying that this is a high value lead, right? So by the way, I'm not just giving this to you and saying, go call them, and I just pull it out of some random system. I'm saying this customer has Salesforce CRM and we know that's a good fit. They're showing intent to buy, right? Being able to highlight those specific events and the reasons that you have chosen that as a high value lead, I think goes a long way with sales in my experience. The scenarios that I've been a part of where that's happened have been, at least again in my experience, framed such as that leads are loaded and sales looks at this and goes, I don't understand why people think this is a high value lead. I mean, if they just are looking at something, visited a website, right, and they didn't actually ask for, they didn't fill out a web form, like that's something that potentially should go into nurture. Maybe they're not ready for sales outreach yet. So my recommendation would be share as much as possible in terms of why you feel it's a high value lead. And again, data-driven approach, right? So some of those quantitative metrics or an understanding of the ICP and kind of validating that and sharing that with sales, I think will go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent advice. I think sellers a lot of time crave that bigger picture, and they're not always given it. So
Absolutely.
if you can paint them the full picture, it can go far. Awesome. Well, I know we saw a few people typed in one, so the D&B team will be following up and getting those leads over to you. But Chris, I want to thank you, man. Thanks for hanging out with me. That was a very enjoyable discussion, and I know based on the engagement, the community absolutely loved it. So thank you. And thank you for everyone who hung out with us for the last hour. Have a great rest of your week, and happy selling.